Great. Okay, so we're going to switch to a slightly different topic. This is a project that I worked on with Paige Radagaro from Clemson University, who's also on the in the audience today. We this summer ran a remote video game coding camp for autistic first years who are coming into Clemson, and I wanted to talk to you about how that went and what we did to accommodate the challenges that autistic students face when they are first engaged with college level courses. So we built a coding camp this summer, and there were 7 autistic college first years who were part of a Clemson Spectrum program for new students to the university who are going to be rising freshmen. And our goals were pretty much, we wanted to teach programming, we wanted to teach communication skills that were appropriate for working in teams, because that's something they're going to need for computer science coursework. And in our particular case, we wanted to teach video game design. And the results of our project were to sort of emphasize how to enable autistic students to feel less anxious and less stressed while working in teams, which is something that was relatively new for them. And in our course, we fortunately were able to find that they learned a lot about communication, which was one of our major goals. So let me explain what autism is for those who are new to this. It's a neurological condition. It affects the way people experience the world. There are a lot of differences that are from non-autistic people or neurotypical people in social interaction, verbal and nonverbal communication. Their range of interests might be very constrained, and there's often repetitive behaviors. Now, it's not to say that all autistic people are similar. They're very different. They have a very wide range of abilities, characteristics, and preferences, but these tend to be fairly noticeable to neurotypical people. Now, in our coding camp, the 7 students we had were self-disclosed, so they identified themselves to be part of this particular Spectrum program at Clemson. We were working with Thomas Beeson, who's an ABA therapist and also the coordinator of the Spectrum program. ABA is Applied Behavioral Analysis Therapy, which is a very common therapy for parents to give to their kids who are diagnosed with autism at a young age. James, Dominic, and Connor Phillips were essentially our student helpers, TAs, if you will. And we had basically a 13-day summer course with 3 hours per day on Zoom. We decided to use Microsoft MakeCode, which is a block-based programming language for building video games. And we went through maybe 13 or 14 different programming environments for games development before we settled on that one. So, like I said before, the goals of the camp are pretty much understand game design and mechanics, build a video game with your team. And then we had a lot of very explicit communication goals. So learning to work in your team, which is really all about communicating proactively and explaining what you're doing to other people. Collaboration, reflection are kind of also metacognition type of activities we wanted them to learn. We wanted to help them get to know one another and be able to learn how to present work to others, especially strangers. So we spent 1 week, the first week pretty much just doing instruction, and then a week and a half with team projects. And when we did the direct instruction, because we were doing things remotely, we hadn't really ever seen a remote camp, coding camp for autistic people. So we were kind of taking ideas from other remote camps and from other programming courses that were given to autistic people in person. And so we adopted kind of like an active learning approach to try to keep people entertained or more likely to pay attention. So there's like a see one, do one, show one type of model where we would build parts of the game Pac-Man, which is surprisingly hard to build. We would do something, then we'd have them do something, and then we would ask one of them to show us what they did. And that was a cycle of about like 3 minutes each little chunk. So every 10 minutes we did one of these cycles. We also did think, pair, share type exercises to get them to talk to each other. And then we did some paper prototyping for planning, and everything we did with them, we scaffolded very heavily. I'll talk about the scaffolding next. And the students mostly worked with their teams in breakout rooms, and we found that, like many parents and teachers are finding, when they are running Zoom classes, you kind of need somebody paying attention to them in the breakout rooms, otherwise they don't always do their work. So we always had an instructor for each breakout room. We tried to make sure that there was structure in their work. Something that's challenging for a lot of autistic teens is to understand how to divide their time. And so we had a Scrum stand-up meeting basically every 10 minutes that we scaffolded for them, where you take a break, reflect on what you did, and then switch who's in charge of touching the computer. Basically, one person could be coding and sharing their screen at a time, and then the others would tell them what to do. And then after each camp day, we would meet all the instructors to discuss each student and what their progress was like, and see if we had to make any changes for the next day. So it was very, very hands-on, it was basically 4.5 hours a day for the instructor, as well as about 3 hours a day for the students. Now, here's the things we did specifically to try to address autism. So we emphasized communication skills, but we didn't just say learn how to talk to somebody else, because that's not something that really works. When autistic people don't know what to do, they can't figure it out. But we gave them scripts. So we gave them a script to get to know one another through an interview. We gave them a script to figure out how to talk to each other about team working styles and process norms. And by not being capable, it's like nobody knows how to work together in a group. This is not a normal human behavior that you figure out. It's something that you can be taught. And if we teach them explicitly good skills, they're going to take that with them throughout the rest of their computer science curriculum. We did the think, pair, share, and the see one, do one, show one. We also helped them structure work. So the part of the reason for dividing up the time in their group projects into every 10 minutes was to emphasize them to think about what they just did, and to think, are we going in the right direction? Should we change tasks? Should we change direction? We also tried to enforce a regular handoff between the roles to teach them how to switch tasks and prioritize and plan. And then the final thing is each day, because it was kind of like about 2 hours of just group work, we wanted to make sure that they would end each day on a high note where they could actually have finished something. So the instructor would pay attention in the last half hour to figure out if there's where the good opportunities were to stop work each day, and suggest maybe after you finish task X or task Y, this is a good place to stop and you can pick it up again tomorrow. We also had them work together in pairs and trios, and that was actually super important in order to get them to feel comfortable with people, because autistic people tend to have trouble getting to know new people and figuring out how they behave and what to say in response to what they are to how they're being communicated with. So team stability here helps reduce the anxiety. So what we did is we made sure that they always worked with the same pair and the same trio every single day from the beginning of the course, actually. We asked them to learn how to, or encourage them to proactively talk about their work, to think aloud, which worked incredibly well with one of our teams, so that the other person can keep up and figure out what's happening. And then we had those stand-up meetings. As I said, we also scaffolded them too with scripts of what you should say when you're in a stand-up meeting. At the end of the course, we had presentations, and we scaffolded the presentation script and tell them what to say. We gave them time to practice so they could get used to the idea of what it's like to talk in front of other people, but then talk in front of people that they knew. So they had to practice in front of their team, they had to practice in front of the class, and then they had to practice in front of visitors like their parents or teachers who came to the class. And in addition, we also had them practice individual components of the course, of the presentation, over the prior week, so that they would get used to each piece. And so nothing was new on the day that the highest anxiety would be there, when they have to talk to some new people. In addition, we also scaffolded how to say nice things about other people's presentations, and how to receive criticism from other people, and what to say in response to it. And all those things are just things that kids get taught, and it's very important to be able to make them explicit for autistic students to see it. So findings-wise, we have a couple quotes which I thought were really nice. In communication, we had one student named Luke who said, "I forced myself to make time to let my group members speak, and I made myself go against my better nature, which would be to talk the entire time." So that was all about trade-offs, handoffs between him and his partner. In another group, we had two women working really well in sync, but they left the man out. and he was not really paying attention that much anyway. But whenever he was perked up and decided to display some kind of passion about a piece of the project, that led to a really great brainstorming session where everybody kind of came together in the group and worked together. Now, we also noticed that like adults often that I've seen in Microsoft, students have lots of trouble recognizing when they're actually stuck. And they, we thought the Scrum method would help them promote reflection, but only if they wanted to. It turned out it was very difficult to ask people to reflect if they weren't necessarily inclined to do so. Now, we did find that one thing that we did helped a lot with reducing stress, which was we let students turn on or off their camera as they wanted to. And actually 2 of the students did not turn on the camera at all. Actually, I think twice accidentally they turned it on. But what Bob said was he honestly preferred online courses because he can relax more. You're not staying at a desk watching the instructor. Here you can just watch from anywhere. And it's something that just makes them feel a little bit more at ease, especially when this was actually their first experiences with online courses, because I think in the spring their high school didn't really do much with online courses, the high schools that they were at. So we learned a lot about communication, and specifically we kind of really were focusing on self-efficacy here. So I'll just be almost done here. So Luke said, I love the experience, I love expressing ideas. And so I especially enjoy just talking about something where with never having really done like something like this before. So that was nice. Bob, who is especially good at expressing, doing the think aloud. He said, I have like all my head being able to work that out and make, well, I should have edited this for teenager English. I can work this all out and pass on my knowledge to others and get help and get everybody on the same page, which was especially important because Bob's partner was not talkative. And that's one of the things that we often see with boys with autism is sometimes they just don't talk at all, or they talk very, very specifically about like when they're asked a question. Now, Martha was really an interesting case because she also didn't like to talk. She didn't want to have her camera on. But when she was in a group with her partners, she would talk to them as long as the instructor wasn't really watching. But what she said at the end, when we asked, like, what did you really get? What value did you really get out of this course? She said, well, people actually do want to hear my ideas. They do want to hear my input. And sometimes they do think it's good and they do think it's constructive. And that was super nice to hear because she was she probably had the least self-confidence of anyone in the group. And it grew immensely just from working with others. I thought that was awesome. Now, at the end here, basically, we're planning to run this again. And again, it's going to very likely be remote given COVID. We are going to recruit some of the previous camp students to act as teaching assistants in the class in the next camp, which will be kind of fun. We think there's probably 2 who would be really good. And we're also recruiting autistic people to help us sort of fine tune the camp design. Initially, this was created without autistic input, just from people who know a lot about autism research and know about working with autistic people. But I think it'll be even better with autistic voices to help kind of fine tune the particular tasks that we do and activities, and maybe even the design. And then we're also thinking if we can find other universities and secondary schools, maybe in South Carolina, where Clemson is now, might be a good way to expand the program and address more students, which would be great. Anyway, so thanks, and I hope we can do a lot for other students coming into higher ed as well as K through 12. Thanks.
Thanks, Andy. I have a follow-up question, which may prompt other follow-up questions. I wonder if you could say a little bit about how your work translates into things that happen beyond, like, sort of at a broader group. Does it connect with other stakeholder groups or communities? Are you getting any inquiries from other, I don't know, similar researchers? Do you see, is there a bigger picture that is out there, or is that still being formulated?
I think that's still being formulated. A lot of the work I've seen with education for autistic students is certainly it's in person. The remote thing was very new. We didn't find anybody else doing that yet. We did talk to a professor at Georgia Tech who's going to start working with people with intellectual disabilities in an online course. We know of some work from CU Boulder of people working with people with intellectual disabilities, so that's an in-person type of course. So computing courses for people with disabilities are a thing now. It's not very common still. It's still like individual researchers working at individual workshops. I haven't seen anything. I personally haven't seen anything for scale. I think Clayton Lewis would be a lot better to talk about those kinds of efforts. He's a lot more aware of that than I am. Okay,
great, thanks. I don't think we have any other questions, so thank you for jumping in and helping us with this.
Of course.